The morning of December 20th, 1944, near Elsenborn Ridge in Belgium, a single American artillery battery from the 38th Field Artillery Battalion received an urgent fire mission. German infantry from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division were massing in a tree line approximately 4,000 meters distant, preparing for another assault on American positions. The battery commander acknowledged the coordinates. The guns, 4 M1 105mm howitzers, were already laid on defensive fire concentrations. The crews needed only seconds to make final adjustments. The first rounds went downrange at 0730 hours. The battery did not stop firing for the next 48 hours. When the guns finally fell silent on the morning of December 22nd, the battalion ammunition officer tallied the expenditure. This single 4-gun battery had fired 12,320 rounds in 48 hours. 12,000 rounds from 4 howitzers. That averaged 64 rounds per gun per hour, sustained continuously for 2 full days and nights. The barrels glowed red-hot in the darkness. Crews rotated through brief rest periods while other men served the guns. Ammunition trucks shuttled between the battery position and ammunition supply points in an unbroken stream, delivering shells faster than the guns could fire them. 4 kilometers away, a German artillery battery from the 277th Volksgrenadier Division occupied similar defensive positions. The German battery had 6 10.5-centimeter left 18 howitzers, newer guns with longer range than the American pieces. The German battery commander received comparable fire missions supporting German infantry attacks. His guns began firing on December 20th as well. When German artillery operations finally ceased in that sector on December 22nd, the German battery had expended 930 rounds. 930 rounds from 6 guns over 48 hours. That averaged 3 rounds per gun per hour. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The disparity was not isolated to this engagement. Similar patterns appeared across every sector of the Western Front from Normandy in June 1944 through the final collapse of German resistance in May 1945. American artillery batteries routinely fired thousands of rounds per day. German batteries fired hundreds. The difference was not explained by American superiority in gun design. German artillery pieces were excellent weapons, comparable and often superior to American guns in range, accuracy, and destructive power. The LEFH-18 was a superb howitzer, reliable and effective. The German 15-centimeter SFH-18 heavy howitzer outranged its American equivalent. The difference was not courage or skill. German artillery crews were professionals, many with years of combat experience on the Eastern Front. They understood their equipment and executed fire missions competently. The difference lay in systems that most soldiers never saw: logistics networks, industrial production, ammunition supply chains, maintenance procedures, and doctrinal concepts about how artillery should be employed. These invisible factors determined how many rounds a battery could fire and sustain, and they revealed a chasm between American and German capabilities that widened as the war progressed. Understanding why American batteries fired 12,000 rounds while German batteries fired 900 requires examining the entire system that fed those guns, from factories in the United States to forward ammunition dumps in Belgium, from peacetime planning in the 1930s to wartime execution under desperate conditions. The story is not primarily about the guns themselves. The story is about what it takes to keep guns firing continuously under combat conditions, and what happens to an army that can no longer provide what its artillery needs to function. American artillery doctrine in World War II emphasized sustained fire support. The concept dated to World War I, when American artillery officers observed that suppressive fire, keeping enemy troops pinned down while friendly infantry advanced, was often more valuable than attempting to destroy enemy positions with a few well-aimed shots. Sustained suppressive fire required vast quantities of ammunition delivered continuously to firing batteries. American doctrine accepted and planned for this requirement. The Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, had developed ammunition planning factors during the interwar period. These planning factors specified how many rounds per gun per day an artillery battery should be capable of firing during different types of operations. For offensive operations, the planning factor was 100 rounds per gun per day for 10.5mm howitzers. For defensive operations against determined attacks, the factor increased to 200 rounds per gun per day. These were planning minimums, not maximums. Battalions were expected to exceed these rates when tactical situations required. The planning factors drove logistics planning throughout the Army. If a division had 48 and 10.5mm howitzers and planning factors called for 100 rounds per gun per day during offensive operations, then the division artillery required 4,800 rounds per day just for the 10.5mm guns. Add howitzers of other calibers and the daily requirement exceeded 10,000 rounds. Multiply by multiple divisions in a corps, and corps required hundreds of thousands of rounds per day. The entire logistics system, from ammunition production in the United States to transportation across the Atlantic to distribution within European theater, was designed to deliver ammunition at these rates. American ammunition production was staggering. The Radford Arsenal in Virginia, which opened in 1941, produced artillery shells and propellant charges. At peak production in 1944, Radford employed more than 20,000 workers and produced ammunition 24 hours per day. The arsenal occupied 18,000 acres and included hundreds of buildings connected by 75 miles of railroad track and 220 miles of roads. Similar facilities operated at Joliet Arsenal in Illinois, Indiana Arsenal, and other locations across the United States. Total American production of 10.5mm high-explosive shells during World War II exceeded 60 million rounds. Production of 15.5mm shells exceeded 16 million rounds. These figures include only high-explosive projectiles, not illumination rounds, smoke rounds, or chemical rounds. The ammunition was manufactured to exacting specifications with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Quality control procedures ensured that shells would function reliably even after months of storage and transportation across thousands of miles. Once manufactured, ammunition moved through a logistics pipeline that stretched from American factories to European battlefields. Shells were shipped by rail from factories to ports, loaded onto cargo ships, transported across the Atlantic, unloaded at ports in Britain or France, moved by rail or truck to theater ammunition supply points, distributed to corps and division supply points, and finally delivered by truck to firing batteries. The entire journey required weeks, and maintaining continuous flow required coordination of transportation, storage, and distribution across multiple echelons and thousands of miles. The United States Army established a dedicated ammunition supply service to manage this flow. The Ordnance Department operated ammunition supply points at theater, corps, and division level. Each level maintained stockpiles sufficient to sustain operations, even if supply lines were temporarily disrupted. Theater ammunition supply points in France held millions of rounds. Corps supply points held hundreds of thousands. Division supply points held tens of thousands. Battery positions held immediate reserves of several hundred rounds per gun. The distribution system used standardized procedures and dedicated transportation assets. Truck companies assigned to ammunition supply missions did nothing else. The drivers and vehicles were reserved for ammunition transportation. The 2.5-ton 6x6 truck, the standard American cargo vehicle, could carry approximately 100 10.5mm rounds or 50 15.5mm rounds. A battery firing 200 rounds per gun per day, 800 rounds total for a 4-gun battery, required 8 truck trips per day just to maintain ammunition supply. American logistics planning accounted for this requirement. Artillery battalions had organic transportation, but additional truck companies were allocated to corps and division artillery for ammunition resupply. During intense operations, convoys ran continuously between ammunition supply points and battery positions. Traffic control was coordinated to ensure ammunition trucks had priority on roads. Military police at intersections waved ammunition convoys through while other traffic waited. The German ammunition supply system operated under entirely different constraints. German ammunition production had been substantial in the early war years. The Heeres Munitions and Stolt ammunition factories at Wittenberg, Spandau, and other locations produced millions of rounds through 1942. But by 1943, Allied strategic bombing campaign began disrupting German industrial production. Factories were damaged or destroyed. Raw materials became scarce. Transportation networks were degraded by attacks on railroads and bridges. German ammunition production declined steadily from 1943 onward. The Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production under Albert Speer attempted to disperse production to underground facilities and smaller workshops, but dispersal reduced efficiency and complicated quality control. By 1944, German ammunition production had fallen to a fraction of 1942 levels, even as frontline consumption increased. The Eastern Front consumed vast quantities of German ammunition. Soviet offensives in 1943 and 1944 forced German forces into continuous defensive operations that required heavy artillery expenditures. The Wehrmacht prioritized ammunition allocation to the Eastern Front, where the main threat to German survival existed. Western Front units received lower allocation priority. By June 1944, when Allied forces invaded Normandy, German ammunition stocks in Western Europe were already constrained. The German 7th Army defending Normandy operated under strict ammunition rationing from the first day of the invasion. Artillery batteries received daily allocation quotas, typically 10 to 20 rounds per gun per day, and were prohibited from exceeding quotas without explicit corps-level authorization. Battery commanders who overspent their allocation faced disciplinary action. The rationing created impossible tactical dilemmas. A German battery under attack by American infantry might receive a fire mission requiring sustained fire to break up the attack. But if the battery fired the ammunition needed to stop the attack, it would exceed its daily quota and have no ammunition remaining for subsequent missions. Battery commanders had to choose between supporting troops in immediate contact and preserving ammunition for future operations. Often they chose to limit their fire, delivering brief missions and hoping that limited fire would suffice. German logistics compounded the ammunition shortage. The Wehrmacht transportation system relied heavily on railroads, and Allied air attacks systematically destroyed railroad infrastructure across France and Germany. Locomotives and rolling stock were destroyed faster than German industry could replace them. By late 1944, German rail transport capacity had collapsed in many areas. Road transportation depended on trucks and horses. Germany had mobilized approximately 2.75 million horses during World War II, and horses remained the primary means of moving artillery and supplies for most infantry divisions. But horses were vulnerable to air attack, required substantial quantities of fodder that competed with other supply requirements, and moved slowly. A horse-drawn supply column could cover perhaps 25 kilometers per day under favorable conditions. In mud or winter conditions, movement slowed to 10 kilometers per day or less. German trucks were less numerous and less reliable than American vehicles. Germany produced approximately 350,000 trucks during the entire war, compared to American production of more than 2.5 million. German trucks included dozens of different models from various manufacturers with non-standardized parts. Maintenance was complicated by lack of spare parts and shortage of trained mechanics. By 1944, much of the German truck fleet consisted of captured vehicles from France, Belgium, and the Soviet Union, creating an impossible maintenance situation, with vehicles requiring different parts, different fuel specifications, and different maintenance procedures. The German ammunition supply chain, from factory to firing battery, involved multiple transshipments and delays. Ammunition produced in Germany moved by rail to forward supply depots, assuming rail lines were operational. From forward depots, ammunition moved by truck or horse-drawn wagon to division supply points. From division supply points to battery positions, movement was typically by horse-drawn wagon. Each transshipment required labor to unload and reload, consumed time, and created opportunity for loss or damage. Under combat conditions in Normandy and subsequent campaigns, German ammunition supply became increasingly erratic. Batteries might receive a large delivery one day and nothing for 3 days afterward. Battery commanders hoarded ammunition, holding reserves against the possibility that resupply might not arrive when needed. This hoarding further reduced the ammunition available for actual fire missions. The result was systematic underutilization of German artillery. German batteries had guns and trained crews, but lacked ammunition to employ those guns effectively. A German battery that might be technically capable of firing several hundred rounds per day instead fired dozens of rounds, not because the battery could not fire more, but because ammunition was not available. American ammunition supply, in contrast, operated with substantial excess capacity. American batteries rarely faced ammunition shortages. When a battery requested resupply, trucks delivered ammunition within hours. Battery commanders did not hoard because they knew additional ammunition would arrive as needed. This confidence enabled aggressive fire planning. American artillery officers could plan fire missions based on tactical requirements without concern about ammunition availability. The 38th Field Artillery Battalion, that fired 12,000 rounds in 48 hours near Elsenborn Ridge, did so because ammunition was available. The Battalion Fire Direction Center requested resupply. Corps ordnance allocated trucks. Ammunition convoys delivered shells continuously. The guns fired until the tactical situation no longer required fire, not until ammunition ran out. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical challenge of sustaining high rates of fire involved more than ammunition supply. Artillery pieces, subjected to continuous firing, experienced mechanical stress that could cause breakdowns or catastrophic failures. Barrels heated from repeated firing. Recoil mechanisms required maintenance. Breech blocks wore from constant opening and closing. Maintaining guns in action required not just ammunition, but spare parts, maintenance personnel, and time for servicing. American artillery maintenance procedures were systematic and thorough. Each battery had a dedicated maintenance section with trained mechanics and stocks of common spare parts. Battalion maintenance sections provided additional support with more specialized tools and parts. Division ordnance companies could perform major repairs or replace entire assemblies. The maintenance system operated in echelon, with minor repairs handled at battery level and major repairs passed to higher echelons. Artillery crews were trained in preventive maintenance procedures. Between fire missions, crews cleaned guns, inspected recoil mechanisms, checked sites and laying equipment, and reported any problems to maintenance sections. Maintenance was not something done only when guns broke down. Maintenance was continuous activity integrated into battery operations. The M1 105mm howitzer was designed for maintainability. The recoil mechanism was a sealed unit that could be removed and replaced in the field without specialized tools. The breech block assembly could be disassembled for cleaning and inspection using common tools carried in the gun crew's equipment. Barrel wear was measured regularly using bore gauges, and worn barrels could be replaced at ordnance depots. American doctrine specified maximum sustained rates of fire that balanced tactical effectiveness against mechanical stress. For the M1 105mm howitzer, the maximum sustained rate was 4 rounds per minute for extended periods. Higher rates were possible for brief periods, but sustained firing at maximum rate would cause excessive barrel heating and accelerate wear. The battery that fired 12,000 rounds in 48 hours averaged approximately 64 rounds per gun per hour, slightly more than 1 round per minute, well within sustainable limits. German artillery pieces were generally comparable to American guns in mechanical reliability. The LE-FH 18 10.5 cm howitzer was a robust weapon with excellent service record. Under proper maintenance conditions, German guns were fully capable of sustained fire operations, but German maintenance faced the same supply constraints that affected ammunition availability. Spare parts for German artillery were manufactured in Germany and distributed through the same disrupted logistics network that carried ammunition. By 1944, spare parts were chronically scarce. Battery maintenance sections improvised repairs using salvaged parts or local fabrication when official spare parts were unavailable. Gun crews performed maintenance as best they could, but often lacked proper tools or materials. Barrel wear was a particular problem. Artillery barrels have finite service life, measured in rounds fired. Each time a shell is fired, hot propellant gases erode the barrel interior, gradually enlarging the bore and reducing accuracy. After several thousand rounds, a barrel becomes worn and must be replaced. In normal operations, worn barrels are removed and sent to depots for relining or replaced with new barrels. German artillery by 1944 often operated with worn barrels that should have been replaced. Barrel replacement required sending guns to depot-level facilities, and the transportation and time involved meant guns were unavailable for combat operations. With shortages of serviceable guns, commanders were reluctant to pull guns out of service for barrel replacement, unless absolutely necessary. So, guns continued firing with worn barrels that reduced accuracy but still functioned. American artillery replaced barrels systematically. When bore measurements indicated significant wear, guns were sent to ordnance depots. New or relined barrels were installed. The gun returned to service. The process typically required several days, but ensured guns maintained accuracy. American artillery battalions could afford to send guns for barrel replacement because there were sufficient guns in theater to maintain unit strength, even while some guns were in maintenance. The disparity in maintenance capability reinforced the disparity in ammunition supply. German batteries that received limited ammunition also struggled to maintain their guns in optimal condition. American batteries that received abundant ammunition also had the maintenance support it needed to keep guns serviceable despite heavy use. The human factor in sustaining fire operations was equally important. Artillery crews subjected to continuous operations experienced physical and mental exhaustion. Loading, aiming, and firing a howitzer required coordinated effort from a crew of 8 to 10 men performing physically demanding work. A single round required multiple crew members to lift a 75-pound shell, ram it into the breech, insert the propellant charge, close the breech, lay the gun on target, and fire. Repeating this process hundreds or thousands of times over days without rest pushed crews to their limits. American artillery doctrine recognized the endurance problem and provided solutions. Batteries rotated crew members through rest periods while maintaining continuous fire. During intense operations, additional personnel from battalion headquarters or other units reinforced battery crews. Hot meals were delivered to gun positions so crews could eat without leaving their stations. Medical personnel monitored crews for signs of exhaustion or heat injury. The 38th Field Artillery Battalion, firing 12,000 rounds in 48 hours, rotated crews in shifts. Each gun had a primary crew and a relief crew. The primary crew fired for 4 hours, then rested while the relief crew took over. Rest periods allowed men to eat, sleep briefly, and recover physical stamina. Medical personnel monitored gun crews and removed anyone showing signs of exhaustion or illness. Replacement personnel arrived from battalion rear areas to fill gaps. German artillery lacked similar personnel depth. German batteries operated with minimal manning, and there were no substantial reserves of trained personnel to provide relief. Crews fired their guns until physically unable to continue, rested briefly, then returned to action. The physical strain compounded by inadequate food and persistent shortage of everything from ammunition to spare parts degraded German artillery effectiveness even when ammunition was available. The cumulative effect of all these factors, ammunition supply, maintenance support, personnel endurance, created the stark disparity between American and German artillery capabilities. American batteries could fire thousands of rounds per day because the entire system supporting those batteries was designed to enable sustained, high-volume fire. German batteries fired hundreds of rounds per day because the system supporting them had collapsed under the combined pressures of strategic bombing, logistical degradation, and resource prioritization toward the Eastern Front. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 and January 1945 provided the clearest demonstration of the ammunition disparity between American and German artillery. The German offensive represented the Wehrmacht's last major attempt to achieve operational success on the Western Front. German commanders assembled 3 armies with over 200,000 troops and approximately 1,900 artillery pieces for the attack. Success required not just initial surprise, but sustained artillery support to suppress American defenses and cover German infantry and armor as they advanced. The offensive began before dawn on December the 16th, 1944. German artillery opened with a massive preparatory bombardment along a 60-mile front from Monschau in the north to Echternach in the south. For the first hour, German guns fired at rates unprecedented in Western Front operations since Normandy. Batteries expended their carefully hoarded ammunition reserves to support the initial assault. The bombardment was heavy enough to disrupt American communications and suppress forward positions. But the initial bombardment consumed ammunition that could not be replaced. Within hours of the attack beginning, German ammunition supply problems reasserted themselves. Artillery batteries that had fired hundreds of rounds during the opening bombardment found themselves rationed to dozens of rounds for subsequent missions. The supply columns moving ammunition forward to sustain the offensive were attacked by American fighter bombers once weather cleared. Trucks and horse-drawn wagons carrying artillery shells were destroyed on the roads or forced to hide during daylight hours. The 1st SS Panzer Corps, attacking in the northern sector of the offensive, initially advanced rapidly. The Corps' artillery regiment had been allocated substantial ammunition reserves for the operation. But as American resistance stiffened around Elsenborn Ridge, German artillery found itself engaged in exactly the type of sustained fire operations that consumed ammunition faster than supply could replace it. The 2nd Infantry Division, defending Elsenborn Ridge, was supported by the 37th, 38th, and 15th Field Artillery Battalions, along with Corps artillery from the 5th Corps Artillery. These American units had access to ammunition supply points that had been stockpiling shells for weeks. The Corps' ammunition supply point at Eupen held more than 600,000 rounds of 10.5mm ammunition alone. Distribution from supply point to firing batteries involved truck convoys running continuously despite poor road conditions and German artillery fire on American rear areas. The contrast between German and American artillery operations became apparent within the first 48 hours. German batteries supporting the 12th SS Panzer Division's attacks toward Bullingen and Dom-Bütgenbach fired heavy preparatory bombardments before each assault. But once the preparatory fires lifted and German infantry and tanks advanced, German artillery support diminished rapidly. Battery commanders had expended most of their allocation during the preparation and had little ammunition remaining for responsive fires once the attack was underway. American artillery fired continuously throughout each German attack. Forward observers with the 2nd Infantry Division called for defensive concentrations as German forces approached. Fire direction centers processed multiple fire missions simultaneously, directing fires from dozens of batteries onto German assembly areas, approach routes, and assault positions. When German attacks penetrated American lines, artillery delivered fires danger close to American positions to break up the attacks. Throughout all of this, ammunition supply never faltered. Trucks continued delivering shells to battery positions, even while fighting raged nearby. The 99th Infantry Division, holding positions south of Elsenborn Ridge, faced the full weight of the 1st SS Panzer Division's assault. The division artillery consisted of 4 battalions with a total of 48 10.55mm howitzers. During the period from December 16th through December the 22nd, these 48 guns fired more than 75,000 rounds. That averaged more than 1,500 rounds per day, 31 rounds per gun per day, sustained continuously for a week under desperate defensive conditions. The ammunition expenditure would have been impossible without the logistics system that delivered shells to the batteries. The 99th Infantry Division ammunition supply point received daily convoys carrying 10,000 to 15,000 rounds. Distribution from division supply point to battalion supply points required trucks driving through areas under German artillery fire. Several trucks were destroyed and drivers killed, but the convoys continued. Additional trucks were allocated from Corps transportation assets to replace losses and maintain flow. German prisoners captured during the Bulge consistently reported ammunition shortages when interrogated by American intelligence officers. A battery commander from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, captured on December the 22nd, stated that his battery had received only 800 rounds total for the entire offensive through that date. His battery had 6 guns, meaning each gun had fired approximately 130 rounds over 6 days. He stated that on several occasions his battery had been unable to respond to urgent fire missions from supported infantry because no ammunition remained and resupply had not arrived. An artillery officer from the 1st SS Panzer Division, captured on January 3, 1945, described the ammunition situation as catastrophic. He stated that by late December, his battalion's batteries were receiving less than 50 rounds per day, total for 12 guns. Fire missions were prioritized ruthlessly, with only the most critical targets engaged. He noted that American artillery seemed to fire without limit, delivering massive concentrations whenever German forces attempted to maneuver, while German artillery could provide only sporadic support. The testimony from German prisoners revealed not just ammunition shortage, but the psychological impact on German forces. German infantry attacking American positions learned they could expect only limited artillery support. The preparatory bombardment before an attack might be heavy, but once the attack began, German artillery would fall silent while American artillery continued firing throughout the battle. German infantry felt abandoned by their own artillery and exposed to overwhelming American fire. The ammunition disparity extended beyond 10.5 millimeter howitzers to all artillery calibers. American heavy artillery, 15.5 millimeter guns, and 8-inch howitzers fired continuously during the Bulge. The 955th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 15.5 millimeter guns, fired more than 15,000 rounds during the battle. The guns, mounted on self-propelled carriages, could displace rapidly between firing positions, and ammunition was delivered continuously by truck convoys. German heavy artillery, 15-centimeter SFH 18 howitzers, and 15-centimeter Canoni 39 guns fired at far lower rates. A typical German heavy artillery battalion during the Bulge fired several hundred rounds over the entire offensive. The guns had sufficient range and destructive power to cause significant damage when they fired, but they fired so infrequently that American forces learned not to fear German heavy artillery as a persistent threat. The role of American ammunition production in enabling this disparity cannot be overstated. During December 1944 alone, American factories produced more than 5 million rounds of artillery ammunition of all calibers. This production occurred in facilities spread across the United States, facilities that were completely invulnerable to enemy attack. German bombers never threatened American ammunition plants. No German sabotage disrupted American production. The factories operated at full capacity, 24 hours per day, with minimal interference. German ammunition production in December 1944 was a fraction of American output. Strategic bombing had devastated German chemical industry, and propellant production was severely constrained. The synthetic nitrogen facilities that produced the chemicals required for propellant manufacture were priority targets for Allied bombers. By late 1944, German propellant production had fallen to levels that could not sustain frontline consumption. Even when German factories managed to produce ammunition, transportation to the front became increasingly difficult. Allied air attacks destroyed railroads faster than German repair crews could restore them. The attack on transportation infrastructure was systematic and cumulative. Every bridge destroyed, every rail yard bombed, every locomotive strafed, reduced German logistics capacity. By December 1944, moving supplies from German factories to frontline units required routes that twisted through undamaged sections of railroad network, involved multiple transshipments between rail and truck transport, and consumed far more time than similar movements in 1942 or 1943. American logistics faced no comparable challenges. Ammunition manufactured in Virginia or Illinois moved by rail to East Coast ports without interference. Ships crossed the Atlantic, escorted by powerful naval forces that had eliminated the U-boat threat by 1944. In European ports, ammunition was unloaded by port battalions with mechanized equipment. From ports, ammunition moved by rail or truck to supply points in rear areas. The distances involved were substantial, but the transportation infrastructure was intact and the vehicles were numerous and reliable. The Allied air interdiction campaign against German logistics was conducted systematically throughout 1944. Operation Transportation, begun in spring 1944, targeted French and Belgian railroads to isolate the Normandy battlefield. After Normandy, similar operations targeted German railroads, the 9th Air Force in tactical support role and the 8th Air Force in strategic bombing role both allocated substantial effort to transportation targets. The bombing was not random destruction. Allied intelligence identified critical rail junctions, marshalling yards and bridges whose destruction would create maximum disruption. Attacks were coordinated to hit multiple related targets simultaneously, preventing German engineers from simply rerouting traffic around damaged sections. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed results, and follow-up attacks hit targets that had been repaired. The cumulative effect was progressive collapse of German rail transportation. German attempts to counter the interdiction through increased use of road transportation failed because Germany lacked sufficient trucks and because roads were equally vulnerable to air attack. Fighter bombers from the 9th Air Force patrolled roads in France and Western Germany throughout daylight hours. Anything moving on the roads was subject to attack. German convoys learned to move only at night, but night movement was slow and inefficient. Drivers without lights on dark roads moved cautiously to avoid accidents. Movement rates at night were perhaps half of daylight rates, effectively cutting transportation capacity by 50%. The result was an ammunition famine at the front and ammunition abundance in the rear. German supply depots in Germany held ammunition that could not be moved forward. German batteries in Belgium and France needed ammunition that could not reach them. The disconnect between production and consumption strangled German artillery effectiveness. American ammunition logistics operated with substantial buffer capacity at every level. Theater ammunition supply points held months of supply. Corps supply points held weeks of supply. Division supply points held days of supply. Battery positions held immediate reserves. At no point in the logistics chain was there a critical shortage that threatened operations. The system was deliberately over-designed to ensure ammunition would always be available when needed. The ammunition expenditure during the Battle of the Bulge reflected this abundance. The First Army fired more than 1.8 million rounds of artillery ammunition during December 1944 and January 1945. This figure includes all calibers from 7.5 mm pack howitzers through 8-inch howitzers. The expenditure averaged approximately 30,000 rounds per day for 60 days of operations. No other army in history had sustained such rates of fire for such duration. The effect on German forces was cumulative and devastating. Every German attack encountered overwhelming artillery fire. Every German assembly area was targeted with mass concentrations. Every German supply column, moving by daylight, was subject to artillery fire, directed by aerial observers. German commanders learned that attempting to mass forces for attack simply presented targets for American artillery. Dispersion reduced vulnerability to artillery, but also reduced combat effectiveness. The dilemma had no solution within German capabilities. The testimony of German commanders after the battle confirmed artillery as a decisive factor. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the offensive, stated in post-war interrogations that American artillery superiority was among the primary reasons the offensive failed. He noted that German artillery could not suppress American defenses effectively, and that American artillery prevented German forces from concentrating for decisive attacks. Oberst Otto Skorzeny, commanding Special Forces operations during the Bulge, reported similar observations. Skorzeny stated that German units advancing into American rear areas found themselves under accurate artillery fire within minutes of being spotted. He attributed this to American aerial observation and noted that German forces had no comparable capability. The combination of observation and rapid artillery response made German operations behind American lines nearly impossible. The village of Bastogne illustrated the ammunition disparity with particular clarity. The 101st Airborne Division and attached units defending Bastogne were surrounded by German forces from December the 21st through December the 26th. The surrounded garrison included artillery battalions from the division artillery and attached corps artillery units. During the encirclement, these American artillery units continued firing at rates that shocked German forces attempting to capture the town. The 10th Armored Division's artillery, particularly the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, was attached to the 101st Airborne Division and became surrounded in Bastogne. The battalion had 3 batteries of M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, 18 guns total. During the siege, the battalion fired more than 10,000 rounds. That averaged approximately 550 rounds per gun over the 6-day encirclement. The ammunition supply to Bastogne during the siege came entirely by air. C-47 transport aircraft from the 9th Troop Carrier Command flew resupply missions despite terrible weather and German anti-aircraft fire. The aircraft dropped supplies by parachute, and recovery teams from the surrounded garrison collected the bundles. Artillery ammunition was high-priority cargo, and substantial quantities reached the defenders despite the difficult delivery method. German artillery surrounding Bastogne fired at far lower rates. The German forces encircling the town included artillery from the Panzer Division, 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and 5th Parachute Division. These units had approximately 80 artillery pieces ranging from 10.5 centimeter howitzers to 15 centimeter guns. Despite numerical superiority over the surrounded American artillery, German guns fired only sporadically. Ammunition shortage prevented sustained bombardment of the American positions. A German artillery observer from the Panzer Division, captured during the breakout to Bastogne, stated that his battalion received less than 30 rounds per day during the siege. He described watching American artillery inside Bastogne firing continuously while German batteries sat silent due to lack of ammunition. He stated the situation was demoralizing because German infantry attacking Bastogne faced devastating American artillery fire, while German artillery could provide minimal support. The relief of Bastogne by elements of the Third Army on December 26th brought additional American artillery into action. The Third Army's artillery included multiple corps artillery groups with heavy guns. These units immediately began firing counter-battery missions against German artillery positions around Bastogne. The German guns, which had been forced to reveal their positions by firing during the siege, were systematically located and engaged. Within 48 hours of the relief, German artillery around Bastogne had been largely suppressed. The suppression resulted not from destruction of German guns, but from destruction of German ammunition supplies and from forcing German batteries to displace constantly to avoid counter-battery fire. German ammunition trucks approaching battery positions were destroyed by American artillery fire, directed by aerial observers. German batteries that remained in position after firing were hit by American counter-battery fire within minutes. The only German response was to fire a few rounds and immediately displace, but displacement consumed time and limited ammunition that could be carried. The winter weather during the Bulge complicated operations for both sides, but affected German logistics more severely than American logistics. Snow and freezing temperatures made roads difficult to navigate. American trucks with chains and experienced drivers managed to maintain movement despite conditions. German horse-drawn transportation effectively stopped during the worst weather. Horses could not pull heavy loads through deep snow, and frozen roads caused horses to slip and fall. German supply columns that relied on horses for most transportation found themselves immobilized for days during periods of heavy snow. American truck convoys continued operating throughout the winter. The Red Ball Express and other organized truck convoy systems moved supplies from ports to forward areas, even during terrible weather. Trucks broke down or were damaged in accidents, but the fleet was large enough that losses were replaced and overall capacity remained sufficient. The maintenance system kept trucks operational, and spare parts were available to repair vehicles that broke down. The impact of weather on ammunition supply was therefore asymmetric. American artillery continued receiving ammunition throughout the winter. German artillery faced increasing difficulty getting ammunition forward as winter conditions worsened. By January 1945, some German batteries were receiving less than 10 rounds per gun per week. Such allocation rates made artillery nearly irrelevant as a combat arm. The ammunition disparity extended beyond the Bulge to all operations in Western Europe, from Normandy through the final German surrender. During the Normandy campaign, from June through August 1944, American artillery fired more than 10 million rounds. During the pursuit across France in August and September, American artillery continued firing at high rates despite the rapid advance and extended supply lines. During the battle for the Hürtgen Forest in autumn 1944, American artillery fired hundreds of thousands of rounds supporting grinding infantry operations in terrible terrain. In every operation, American artillery fired at rates that German artillery could not match. The cumulative effect shaped the entire character of ground combat on the Western Front. American infantry and armor advanced with confidence that artillery support would be available when needed. American commanders planned operations assuming artillery could deliver whatever fires were required. American tactical doctrine integrated artillery into every phase of every operation. German forces fought with the knowledge that artillery support was limited and uncertain. German infantry attacked without confidence in artillery preparation. German armor maneuvered, knowing German artillery could not suppress American defensive fires. German commanders planned operations under constraints imposed by ammunition shortage. The psychological impact of fighting without adequate artillery support cannot be quantified precisely. But German prisoner interrogations consistently revealed demoralization related to lack of artillery support. The weapons themselves were not the decisive factor. A German Leff-18 howitzer was fully capable of firing thousands of rounds if ammunition was available and the gun was properly maintained. An American M1 howitzer was no more capable of sustained fire than its German counterpart in terms of mechanical limits. The difference lay entirely in the system supporting the guns. American artillery fired 12,000 rounds in 48 hours because American industry produced the ammunition, American logistics delivered the ammunition, American maintenance kept the guns serviceable, and American doctrine demanded sustained fire support. German artillery fired 900 rounds in 48 hours because German industry could not produce sufficient ammunition, German logistics could not deliver what was produced. German maintenance lacked parts and support, and German doctrine had been forced to accept limitations imposed by resource constraints. The story of artillery ammunition in World War II is fundamentally a story about industrial capacity, logistics infrastructure, and systematic planning. The United States entered the war with the world's largest industrial economy and deliberately organized that economy to support military operations. Ammunition production was one element of a comprehensive mobilization that included everything from raw material extraction through finished product delivery to frontline troops. Germany entered the war with substantial industrial capacity, but made strategic decisions that ultimately proved fatal. The decision to fight simultaneously against the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States dispersed German resources across multiple theaters. The decision to prioritize certain weapon systems, like tanks and aircraft, over others like trucks and transport infrastructure, created logistics bottlenecks. The failure to adequately protect industry from strategic bombing allowed Allied air attacks to progressively degrade German production. By 1944, the cumulative effects of strategic decisions made years earlier had created a situation where German artillery, despite good equipment and trained personnel, could not function effectively due to lack of ammunition. American artillery, supported by intact industry and functioning logistics, dominated the battlefield through sheer volume of fire. The individual artillery crews who fired those 12,000 rounds in 48 hours were not superhuman. They were ordinary soldiers performing their assigned tasks. The system that enabled them to fire 12,000 rounds was extraordinary. That system represented the coordinated effort of millions of workers in American factories, thousands of merchant sailors transporting ammunition across the Atlantic, hundreds of truck drivers delivering shells to battery positions, and countless others whose work made sustained fire operations possible. The German crews who fired 900 rounds were equally professional soldiers, doing their best under impossible circumstances. Their failure to match American fire rates was not personal failure. It was systemic failure of industry, logistics, and strategic planning at the national level. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.